Welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury. Good evening.
Oh, that caught me a little bit. Good evening. That caught me a bit by surprise. It sort of had a run up at me and then, but they say a week is a long time in politics. And as we move inexorably towards July the 4th, we thought we'd check in and see what monumental seismic schisms there had been in the world of politics this week. And then we're going to have a little bit of glance because we know for definite now, Simon, do we not, who the runners and riders are in each constituency?
We do, but we're not going to list all to 650. We're just going to list the ones immediately around us.
Yes, they might accuse us of being a bit parochial, but frankly, I don't think the show where we list all the candidates in all 650 constituencies is going to boost the listenership. There's a whole interweb out there if you so desire.
Indeed, yes. But yeah, it's been a strange week then. Can we remember what it was like? It feels there's been more than 7 days in this one. And I'm sure some people considerably more.
Yeah, no, I think this is it's almost a cliche, isn't it? Either kind of everything's happening or nothing's happening, and it's been it's been a bit flat for a while, hasn't it? But now, there's policies flying left, right, and centre. There's televised debates and discussions. There's faux pas and missteps. It's all going on, isn't it?
Yeah, there are indeed policies left, right, far right and centre.
Although I'm not sure there are too many on the left. Oh, there's probably the Lib Dems and the Greens, aren't there? So yes, left, right, far right, and mostly in the centre.
Okay. So yes,
yes.
and of course next week is when they put it all to paper and they give us their manifestos. So
Yes, yeah, no, I know. I was pleased to see the strong authoritarian build more prisons and tackle antisocial behaviour. And I thought, ooh, it's like this has been a message from the Labour Party. It's like, this is a very confusing election indeed. I'm struggling a little bit. So where are we going to start then, Simon?
So, we had a bit of there was a bit of news locally before we kind of go full national, which was, of course, there was much debate and many questions in Facebook and in other places, basically asking whether Portsmouth Independence Party, in the guise of George Madrick, were going to stand a candidate in Portsmouth North. And I think we touched on it actually last in the last show, didn't we? Because the announcement was actually made on the Saturday. So Pip said that basically that they're not standing in the North, but spoilers, they are standing a candidate in Portsmouth South. In the form of Jacob Shaw, but we'll run our way kind of through it. And there was this guy that had been around for a bit, seems to have gone on a bit of a holiday, and then decided, no, actually, screw it. After telling everyone, I'm not in for this. Yeah. I don't know if you can guess who I mean.
Yes. Fascinating, really, isn't it? And again, I don't think many people saw it coming. In terms of, and we're not making a direct segue between the good people of the Portsmouth Independents and Nigel Farage, but there is this element of no one expected Farage to be standing. If you stand 7 times and they keep telling you no, thank you, unless you're Peter, the most robust Lib Dem in the whole of Hilsey, you probably don't keep going. But he's come back. He's going to have crack number 8, and suddenly he's gone from being honorary vice president to leader of the party again. And our airtime's been full of him. So yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing you can say, Simon, is that he comes from a breed of politicians that have a degree of charisma and an ability to influence. And whilst neither of their messages might play to you or I, you've almost got to slightly half admire the resilience to keep going.
Well, I mean, you can say many things about Farage, and obviously the situation in reform is a bit different because other parties seem to have members, for example, choose who the leader is, and there's a selection process of that, and there's a kind of a structure either of local parties actually selecting from a list of approved candidates their PPCs, or if there isn't time, then basically HQ selecting them. Reform seem to have done that a different way because basically Farage is essentially more than 50% shareholder in the organisation. But you can't really deny the fact that he's certainly affected lots of change, and he hasn't even been elected to anything other than an MEP. So, considering actually, and I don't agree with or like the change, let's not hide that under a bushel.
Yeah,
And I
I
don't,
think anyone who's listened to the podcast for
yeah,
any length of time will know that you were not flying the
I've,
flag
I've
for
never, no,
Brexit.
I've never been a
No,
Farage fan, but you have to kind of admire the fact that he knows how to campaign, he knows how to get media attention, he knows how to
yep,
keep media attention, he knows how to be a complete thorn in the side to whoever's trying to run the Conservative Party this week. And you know, love him or loathe him, he's affected the largest fundamental change in British politics in the last 30 years. So, you know, here he
yeah.
is.
Here he is again, and I guess there's an element of there is it is a I guess, and this speaks more to the politics of personality, which we can't cover too much on today's show. But there is an element of he is a polarizing character, isn't he? That there are going to be many folk who are in the reform camp who were committed Brexiteers. They believe that sort of that message, that sort of strong libertarian kind of. Ugh. But there's an element of, for them, they're going to be delighted because the Messiah has returned. For the rest of us, we think he's just a very naughty boy. So I think there is an element of whether him returning is a motivator to the faithful. I'm certain it will be, but whether it actually attracts more people to reform or whether it pushes them away, I guess we'll only know on July the 5th.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, to be fair, and I guess we'll come to this in a second. But to be honest with you, Sunak seems to be doing everything he can to pile people onto a reform bus at the moment. Because what he's done this week has pretty much just seems to have kind of played into his hands. But at the end of the day, there we go. That's democracy, folks. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
people are able to stand, and the electorate in whichever constituency that might be are the ones that get to decide. Aries Salat has made a comment saying that Farage would have been elected under PR, and he might possibly
Almost certainly would have done, but if
done, which
yeah,
and I'm a fan of PR because I don't think that, but as an electoral system that literally chucks most people's votes in the bin, so they don't really count for anything, it is necessarily kind of fair or just. And it would be hypocritical to change your view on that just
yeah,
because you don't like the person the people elect. That's just what happens. That's democracy, right?
absolutely. So I guess there is, and yes, if it had been under PR, then he absolutely certainly would have been elected, and we would have got to hear more from him. But then, if my granny had two wheels and a set of handlebars, she would have been a bicycle, but she wasn't. So if we move on from Nigel Farage, and should we cover Rishi's? Well, it depends how much of a faux pas you think it was on a Thursday in the D-Day commemorations. I guess if you were living under a stone or you're not politically that au fait. Well, first of all, thank you for watching or listening, if this is where you're getting your political content from. But Rishi
We're sorry
left the.
about
That's okay. No, you'll enjoy it. It's
that.
it's it's refreshingly honest. So Rishi left the D-Day commemoration service early in Normandy
Yes.
and flew home to do a pre-recorded interview for Panorama, which I believe is going out tomorrow. And naturally, and rightly so, there was the veterans and the media, and frankly anybody who has any sense of decency, backlashed against that to say, really?
I don't know. I mean, most things you can get there's kind of complication or nuance, and you can try to kind of look into it. But with this, I don't know. I can't get it to compute why nobody, and even Sunak, nobody said this thing should not be in my diary today. This is the wrong thing to do. Not just this will play awfully. This will have terrible optics, but this
Yep.
is the wrong thing to do on this day.
Yeah,
Um, and
and
I
I'm
just don't get. You're either really really incompetent, and the people around you are really really incompetent, or you're doing it on purpose. I'm not quite
yeah,
sure.
yeah, and we haven't got time to cover it fully, but
It's a whole other episode.
in terms of it's a whole episode on conspiracy theories and
Oh yeah,
and kind of
and they
what
think I'm
what
thinking
was
fast, but we won't
what
list them.
exactly what was the message behind the message, and so I guess at the end of the day he said he's sorry, and he almost said sorry before the story even broke. I think before I knew he had bunked off early, and not done his Latin prep. It was a case of I heard that he was saying sorry for something he had done before I knew what he had done wrong, and yeah, strange behaviour, and I guess it coloured the tone a great deal for the I think it was billed as the leaders' debate on Friday night on BBC, but it was sort of some deputy leaders, a couple of leaders, and Penny Mordaunt for the
Yeah,
Conservatives, which again I looked at with my own conspiracy tinfoil hat on with the oh right, so why isn't the Conservative deputy leader there? Oh, they've sent the future leader of the Conservative Party with a dustpan and brush to try and sweep up Rishi's mess. There you go, bit of tin hat from me.
um, well, yeah. I mean, I don't know that they would actually that there would have been that much forethought into it, but it did seem a strange placing. I mean, obviously, I think Sunak had the week before pretty much had got a bit scrappy and said, come on, Starmer, I'll debate you basically, every week between now and the election, or words to that effect. I'm paraphrasing the guy.
Yep.
And Starmer had said, nah, it's fine. Two will be fine. So yeah. Once you've not got the leaders, you've then kind of got to decide kind of how do you work that out, and then it also with the other parties, as as well, one of the contributors on the Portsmouth Politics Facebook group kind of pointed out that Angela Rayner and Penny Mordaunt, this was Mr. Nottage, wasn't it? Was pointed out that they're pretty much as far as they seem to be carrying themselves, it was like the rest of them weren't there and were irrelevant. Farage, by chance, was actually on basically on one end of the stage. He was and I'm sorry, he was on the very right hand side of the stage.
Wasn't he just?
So stage right, just to clarify. So yeah, I don't know. Tuesday just seemed like a car crash of Sunak trying to say the same thing over and over again, and Starmer struggling in a 45-second window because of how the format was set up to give an answer that wasn't just basically a press release soundbite or a bullet.
Mm.
And Starmer just basically kept saying £2,000, £2,000, £2,000. You've got no plan. You've got no plan. You've got no plan. You've got no plan. But apparently, this is the guy that doesn't understand how his calendar works when it comes to
Yeah.
something that's been in the diary for 80 years. So
Yeah, no, I thought the Tuesday debate, I was surprised at how poor Keir Starmer was. I thought he would clearly kind of intellectually and from a background in law, I thought he'd run rings round Rishi. That sort of £2,000 tax rise thing, if I can use a boxing analogy, seemed to go straight through his guard and bang him squarely in the centre of the head. And he really struggled to recover from that for
It did.
me. And
I mean, it
and
did take him about 3/4 of the way through it to start rebutting that.
yeah,
that
yeah, and yeah, that's where I was surprised. And Rishi's tone for me, those of you that listen to the podcast know I'm not a fan. It had a sort of slightly gloating sixth formness about it, but there were some sort of moments of honesty in the debate on the quick fire questions. I think it was one of those things where would many people outside of the already politically engaged watched it? Would it have changed anyone's mind? I'm not certain any of these things do. I think it's a little
No.
bit like for those of us that are really interested. And just a quick aside on the oddness of the 7 podium Friday, because there is an element of, with Plaid Cymru and SNP, very influential parties in there, in Wales and in Scotland respectively. But on a national debate, it's almost, they can only win over a certain percentage of the voters, and you kind of you do wonder whether that format didn't work for me, if I'm honest, Simon. There's an element of, it's great to give everybody a sort of fair shout, but I don't know that you can have national televised debates with parties who are regional.
Yeah, yeah, I mean that's a fair point. I mean, yeah, if there were people in England that thought that any of the points that Plaid were making, Runap Loeth, or I'm not even going to try that again, from Plaid, and Stephen Flynn from the SNP, if someone in Chichester thought that they were making really great points, well, they're not going to be able to vote for them. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know, but I guess it comes down to getting something in the diary, doesn't it? Surely in this day and age, it's easy enough to schedule something that is a leaders' debate of Wales or a leaders' debate of
Yes.
Scotland, and and then if you have a UK national leaders' debate, but it does, like you say, you need to, but in that respect, that then does disadvantage those parties. So I don't know what the right way to do that is. I don't think it's.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that I think you're right. I don't think anybody watches these things and gets their mind made up by them. But if anybody does, or if actually they went into it with their mind made up and thought they were so bloody awful that actually, do you know what? Screw that. I'm not voting for you now.
Yeah.
Then tell us in the comments.
Yeah, and I think that's where for me, and I think even us that are really, quite strongly politically engaged, I think we have a challenge in that, there's always going to be confirmation bias, isn't there? There's an element of, I'm not impressed with Rishi, and I don't like Keir Starmer very much, and I definitely don't like Nigel, and I'm not wildly keen on the Lib. So I'm kind of going to be fault finding with whoever. And I think that just does make, I think it does make the whole thing a little bit, yeah, a little bit challenging. But
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of debates, but I don't know that. Um, Getting some agreement in the comments. Elliot is agreeing that 45 seconds is just too short to give decent answers on. Not that they were going to be voting for either Rishi or Starmer. And Tim basically echoes the point about kind of at this point is Sunak just doing it deliberately so that he either has to stand down or someone gets rid of him and puts him out of our misery.
well,
And so he has to go. He has a reason to go. I don't know, but this is why, because if something happens that just doesn't make sense, that's a vacuum, isn't it, for all of the conspiracy
Yeah, oh
stuff,
god,
that
yeah.
we
Is
see
it?
from
Is
the
it?
likes of lorries
I
that, you know, at
yeah,
the end of the day,
yeah.
we probably will never know what the truth is, but um, yeah, it kind of seems to have moved the mood of the Conservatives on from how the hell do we lose this as with as much dignity intact as we possibly can to we need to figure out who our next leader is now.
Oh,
Because
and I think that, and again, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I think that is a foregone
yeah, sorry,
conclusion. I think, but we've covered it in many different angles on the podcast, but I think there is whilst I think, Johnson fell into that sort of populist, there was something very likable about him for a lot of people. He had a presence, he had a charisma, he was a big character, and I put that in air quotes. And I don't think Rishi has any of that. And I think it is it will see the changing of the guard post election. But on our list of things that happened in the week, have we got them all? Have you got the
I,
list in front of you, or did
yeah,
we miss any?
I think we have. I mean, we've mentioned the D-Day debacle. We've mentioned the debates. We've mentioned the bit of kind of local the local surprise. There weren't any other real kind of surprises from elsewhere across the region. So yeah, should we kind of start working our way
Yes,
our way through?
should we start first by discussing the potential winner of Meon Valley?
Doesn't exist.
Ah, that's why then. So yes, um, yes. So former Conservative MP for Portsmouth South, Flick Drummond, went on to become the MP for the Meon Valley, which is sort of covers Wickham and Waterlooville, but in the boundary changes that are happening in this election, Meon Valley no longer exists. So Flick has headed up is the M3 to Winchester.
Well, neither of us drive,
Um,
so
no, 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 no.
yeah.
I think it is the M3. I'm going to say the M3, and nobody will know me
Okay, I
by
mean,
it.
we can say
But
that.
again, yeah,
Shout us in
they,
the comments if you like.
yep,
Yeah, so it's getting split up into basically bits of it are going in different directions. So some of it's going to Winchester, some of it's going to Fareham and Waterlooville, and some of it's going to East Hampshire.
yes. So no more Meon Valley. So we're going to cover Havant, Portsmouth South, Portsmouth North, Fareham, and Gosport. So where do we want to start, Simon? You are the tour guide.
I'm the tour guide. Okay. So yeah, so just to kind of talk about those boundary changes, Portsmouth North and Portsmouth South, there's no change, as is with Havant and Gosport. But Fareham actually becomes part of that mix, as I just said. That basically a bit of Fareham, well, basically Fareham becomes Hamble Valley, and then the other basically Fareham and Waterlooville. So it kind of splits into two and spreads out a bit eastward. So yeah, that's kind of where it's gone, and Winchester is expanded as I kind of alluded to in regards to that. So yeah, that's what's happening kind of boundary wise. But should we start Havant?
Yes, yes, yes. So
So so the incumbent is Alan Mack for the Conservatives.
the
Uh,
lovable rogue that is Alan Mack.
um, yes, I've heard him called that many times, many times, more times than I care to mention. So yeah, so he was first elected to the seat in 2015 and currently has a majority of wait for it 21,792.
Yes, I mean, Havant for me. This is going to be a fascinating one because if you look at Havant is the kind of Drayton and Farlington ward, isn't it? If in that we've said before that you could put a blue rosette on a tin of beans in Havant and it would get elected. and their council was up until up until 2 years ago was like 30 something councillors for the Conservatives and two for the others. But in the all out elections that have just happened, it was a massacre. Um, Labour now lead the council under a rainbow coalition. Um, so it's that question of, are they, the turnout is, if, as usually in broad terms, the turnout tends to sort of almost double between local and general elections. Are all those electors who are going to turn out for the general, are they going to be the sleeping Tories, or are we going to see an upset in Havant?
Who knows? We can't be sure, but just to go through the list of candidates for the Conservative
Yep.
Party, we've got Alan Mack for Labour, we've got Stephanie Harvey for the Liberal Democrats, we've got Gayatri Sayanath for the Green Party, we've got Nettie Shepherd for Reform, we've got John Perry, and for the Workers' Party of Great Britain, we've got Jennifer Alemano.
So, a full trust, something for everyone there.
Yes, it's definitely something.
And yeah, and I think there is an element of, Reform obviously will feel optimistic. They had a couple of they had a couple of councillors elected in the heart of Lee Park. Obviously, we covered the fact that, you know, Emsworth this time, when given the choice, went completely green and elected 3 Green councillors, and Labour and the Lib Dems did pretty well on Hayling. So no, I think this one is a fascinating one that we will want to keep an eye on. And again, Simon and I are still working through the logistics of election night broadcasts, because whilst it might be entertaining to hear the two of us chatter for 3 hours about Portsmouth, we are going to try and find a way of linking in with other counts so that we can try and cover a bit more. But yeah, I think there's part of me that says, well, if Havant goes anything other than blue, then the Conservatives are really going to have had the night from hell.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if that level of majority gets overturned, then they are very done for.
Yes, yes.
It's an ex-parrot, as the sketch says.
Exactly that. A Norwegian blue, or not so blue.
Yes. So Gosport, bit your old.
Yes, my hometown.
Sorry. Well, one thing I forgot to say. Haven't their kind of turnout for the last couple of generals has been around 63%. So everyone seems to have taken a bit of a dip in 2001, but after that, things kind of seem to get back to normal. And Gosport, yeah, their turnout is around the same. But Gosport, obviously, Caroline. Can I even speak properly? Caroline Dinenage, who has a majority of 23,278, was elected in 2010. But again, the local picture kind of speaking something differently in Gosport, because the year before last, the Liberal Democrats took over control of Gosport Borough Council.
Mm.
So will that translate into an upsurge of support in the general? And the candidates there, obviously, so Caroline Dinenage is standing again for the Conservative Party. For the Labour Party, Edward Batterbury.
Well, we know him.
Yes, I forget. Was it Copner he stood in the locals in Portsmouth?
He's definitely been up before. We've definitely been up before.
So Tim Bearder for the Lib Dems. The Greens, Tony Sudworth, Matt Mullis for Reform UK, Jeff Roberts for as an independent, and for the Heritage Party, Lisa Englefield.
I probably should have done some research on who the Heritage Party are. That's not a name I've come across before.
I don't know who are the Heritage Party? He says feverishly googling.
Yeah. Well,
They
while you do that, I mean, I guess my surprise.
they're a
Yeah.
Eurosceptic, right-wing, populist, and socially conservative political party, according to Tinternet.
Oh well.
They describe themselves as standing for free speech, liberty, traditional family values, national sovereignty, and financial responsibility. Haven't we already had that? Have we not?
Well, I think that appears to be both reform and heritage standing on each other's toes. Yeah, I mean, the only interesting thing there's a number of interesting things there in terms of before we just have a quick look at the numbers. Um, Quite a lot of prominent sort of Lib Dem figures in Gosport. That name isn't one I recognise. So. Um, what have the results been? I know Caroline, whose dad is a lovely man off the telly. I know she's won it for a number of years, but who's been second and what's the winning margin looking like, Simon?
So, she's got, as I say, she's got a majority of over 23,000, but the kind of the next in line, not be funny, it's very, very distant. You've got Labour. So in 2019, Labour had 8,948, and I'm just going to turn the screen back so the audience can see it. The Lib Dems have 5,473, and the Greens had 1,806. So it's not like one of the left-leaning or progressive groups look like they're fit to take over Gosport. But as you say, if that Tim, thank you very much. Tim reminds us that Edward Batterbury stood in ENC in 2024.
That's the
name rang a bell. So my apologies, Edward. Thank you very much for the correction, Tim. Yep. So again, very, very distant. If Gosport and Havant change hands on July the 5th, it's take your ball and go home time, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's always been a fascinating one with Gosport, and again, I grew up there, and it's always returned a Conservative MP. Before Caroline, it was the great eponymous Peter Duckhouse Viggers, who was the MP for many, many years. Didn't live in the constituency. I think lived Winchester way. You don't get many duck houses in Gosport. And the belief was always that, well, it's a naval town, isn't it? Gosport. I don't know how much of that is true, but it is one of those sort of political conundrums, isn't it? That the Lib Dems have enough of a margin to run the council. And like you say, that changed hands a couple of years ago, and I don't think they had bad election results this time around. Yet, when it comes to the national picture, it's not even. They're not even in the same ballpark, are they?
It is interesting how people will vote a different way for locals as they do in the general, and that's why some political parties who very naughty, use bar charts to translate election results and vote shares from local elections into and transplant them into what could happen in a general election, or vice versa. You can do that sort of thing with a bar graph, but you really probably shouldn't. So I just had a quick look at Wikipedia, and that only goes back to 1974, and it was still Peter Viggers then.
Oh yes, yeah, he was the MP all through my sort of formative years. He was the MP for, I think, best part of 40 years as he represented the ward, and again, it was another one of those things where they didn't actually need to count his votes. They could just weigh them, or use a rule. Use a rule of thumb. It's like, well, there's a mountain over there, there's a molehill over there. I, as returning officer, declare Conservative Party duly elected. Should we move up? Yep,
Yes,
carry on, mate.
before we do those two, and Eri Serlat is saying again, I think kind of the interesting thing there will be just what impact the reform vote has on the Conservative vote, how much the Conservative vote. That's the ground that the others are playing in. Is will enough of the Conservative vote stay home or move to reform in their frustration or anger with Sunak? That actually that does let someone else break through, whoever that might be. Who knows? And if you know the answer,
Well,
please.
and that is that, that really in all of these things is the question, isn't it? It is that, you know, but I think if you looked at gospel and you do the sums very quickly in rough terms, and you say, well, okay, you know, our reform are going to take 15% of the vote, and they're going to take them all from the Conservatives. You take that away, and you say, well, okay, so she's lost 5,000 votes. It's down to 18,000. And you say, well, the Labour vote's going to double. You go, okay, 8,500. Right, that's up to 17,000. She still wins. So, you're having to go, Labour doubling their vote, the Reform doing better than even the polls predict at the moment. And even in both of those scenarios, the Conservatives still win. And I think what we didn't see in Gosport in the locals, which we did see in Havant, is we didn't see Reform winning seats or making a big noise. So it's an odd election, because all conventional wisdom in 2019 said there is no chance of Labour overturning the majority the Conservatives have inside 5 years.
Yeah.
And now almost every pundit is saying there is no way at all the Conservatives can win this election. So we will see. So should we nip up the road to the even more lovable scamp that is Suella Braverman in Fareham?
And yes, so while you're busily not being disturbed by a cat, and just to remind everyone, QR code in the top left-hand corner at the moment is the link to our poll. If you want to share your voting intention in next month's general election, by all means scan the QR code, or you can go to I'll put a link in the chat in a moment. So do take part in that. But Suella Braverman, first elected to the seat in 2015, has a majority of 26,086. So if we thought the other two, unless there's something absolutely catastrophic going on, surely that's also going to be kind of the case here. Unless someone's done a bit of key targeting to unseat one of one of the let's be fair, at times controversial figures of the Conservative government.
Times controversial. Those times are all the times controversial, and yeah, yes, and I think there is an element in this one. The boundaries have changed, but Conservative voting Waterlooville has come to join Conservative voting Fareham. I think that the locals showed us some progress from the Lib Dems locally, but again fairly modest. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but Fareham Council still remains staunchly and mostly blue. Again, it's another one where, well, even more so for Suella to lose that seat, and probably I would say being on the more right-leaning side of the party, if I would think that less possible appeal there for reform than perhaps Caroline Dinenage, more of a sort of modern middle ground centrist, or not as far to the right as Suella. So I just can't see anything happening there.
No, and also their turnout, interestingly, over the last 3 general elections has actually increased slightly. They're at 73.1% last time. Yeah, again, as I'm seeing in the comments, agreeing with your point there, I don't think Reform would be targeting Suella's seat because, frankly, there's not really kind of like a fag paper between them, is there?
No, I don't think so. And I think the other thing, and again, we've touched on it in podcasts of previously, there is a belief often amongst, the folk who think that there is this great army of people who are political activists and campaigners who should be doing the political activism and campaignualisation to get their votes. And the fact is, those are not great armies of people. They're relatively small numbers of people, and making no value judgments about any political party or their politics. But if you've got reform activists, um, who are prepared to move about a bit and aren't passionately wedded to Fareham and will die for that cause, they're probably going to get much more purchase in Havant, possibly Gosport, possibly Portsmouth, than they are in Fareham. So I think there is a piece that says you've got to target things you might possibly do best in, and I'm not sure Fareham is going to be it for anybody
Yeah,
other than Conservative.
and I mean it'll be interesting geographically, even in such a um, short area, such a small area between Portsmouth North, obviously, and Fareham. You've got two very different potential futures for the Conservative Party post July the
Uh,
4th.
yes, and again, we will presume that lose, win or draw. Um, you know, Rishi's not staying. That for me is a foregone conclusion. The question will be, where does the Conservative Party go next? And if it has the choice, and we don't want to prejudge our conversation on Portsmouth North, but if it's got a candidate like Suella, who stands very much on the toes of reform, do they want to move into that space? A little bit like, you know, Boris Johnson stood shoulder to shoulder with Farage during the Brexit campaign, and then, we all know where history took that. Or, do the Conservatives look to occupy that centre ground, in which case, or the centre right ground, in which case they're going to go for, PM for PM, smiley face.
It's almost like the advertising writes itself. Just to list the candidates in the newly constituented seat of Fareham and Waterlooville. So Suella Braverman for the Conservative parties, Gemma Furnivall for Labour, Bella Hewitt for the Liberal Democrats, Baz Marie for the Green Party, Kevin Chippendall Higgin for Reform UK, Edward Dean for Rejoin EU, and Robert Holiday for Hampshire Independence. I don't know if there's so much a distant cousin for Portsmouth Independence, but I understand there's been conversations between the two and sharing of expertise.
Yeah, and I don't know, and I don't wish to be disrespectful, but I might be here, whether the Rejoin EU candidate is the most optimistic I've seen on the ballot paper so far, or our friend in Heritage. Yeah, I'm not sure in Fareham you're going to start your Rejoin the EU momentous campaign. But
Well,
no,
if that's where your
any,
conviction is, then
yeah, no. And for me, anybody that puts themselves forward for public office and is prepared to put their grand down on the table and do it, I remove my hat to them, even if the hat, in my case with some of these things, is a touch tin foily.
Okay, so shall we bring it back closer to home?
Let's go back to Pompey.
Yes. So Portsmouth South. Yes. So Portsmouth South, as a shock, I'm sure, to no one in the city, incumbent Stephen Morgan was elected to the seat in 2017. Currently has a majority of 5,363.
And I think if I might just pause you there, Simon, it
Yeah.
is fascinating, isn't it, that when we were looking at those other three, 20,000 plus majorities.
Yeah.
But the bit for me, if you force me to pick those four in order of, I think they will all stay the same. Um, but I'd almost put Stephen down as as the most likely to win of those four. And maybe that's just because of the mood of the nation.
Well,
Um,
yeah, I mean, something really strange is going to happen for an incumbent and well liked Labour MP to be unseated just as Labour come to power. That's just that would have to be
well,
something utterly
well,
bonkers that would
well,
happen.
he did bulk the trend in 2019, didn't he? If you
That's
look at
true. Yeah, his vote share went up when the rest of the parties went down because of yeah and um, yeah and also his next his next challenger, or his closest challenger, is the Conservatives. And in
it hasn't been
2019,
going well in the south for the
no, it
Conservatives.
seems that they've had to kind of search behind a dumpster to find a candidate. Or are they one of the local parties that had one effectively kind of forced upon them?
Yeah, yes. I mean, this is unverified,
Mm.
but there was there was a thread started on Portsmouth politics, which suggested that there was a local candidate who wanted to run, and the CCHQ have dropped a candidate in. Um, so there is a tension there, but I guess there's an element of, some of the kind of feedback for the original poster was, well, you know, if Portsmouth South Conservative Association had their ducks in a row, you know, it's not like it's come early as a surprise, but probably you'd want to be thinking about a general election away in advance. So I mean, this one is fascinating in that, Labour very early got their own version of the bar chart out that did only the Conservatives can beat Stephen Morgan, so a vote for the Lib Dems is a vote for the Conservatives, um, which is slightly fascinating as last year, I think there was an early chart from the Lib Dems, or in 2019, there was an early chart from the Lib Dems that said only the Lib Dems can beat Labour or beat the Conservatives. A vote for Labour is a way. And
Yeah, I mean, I think that
folk picked their poison, didn't they? And ran to
yeah,
Stephen rather.
I think I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes I guess politicos must surely know, or either that or they're terribly optimistic, must surely know that if you have an early poll that tells you again that you're going to unseat the sitting Labour MP, um, then in the environment that it was in 2019, it just, I mean, come on, and it doesn't kind of pass the pass the kind of sniff test, but you have to kind of you have to kind of run with it, um, and kind of go with it. Sorry, one of the comments saying, "Don't worry, the people of Portsmouth know these bar charts are humour." Well, hopefully so, because some people do take them very, very seriously.
Mm,
I've been chased down the street before about a bar chart. Well, that's enough about my social life.
exactly. So we got some friends of the pod standing as well, haven't we?
We have, so interestingly, Elliot's comment, who's one of the candidates, he's saying that he feels that actually there'll be a reduced majority for Stephen Morgan. So that'll be
Ooh.
interesting. So the candidates for Portsmouth South, is it Signe Arkell? I'm seeing, so in the two different sets of information that came out from the council, they've got a different surname quoted for the same person, but one is their how people know them as. So I've just gone with that one because it's the one that one of the local Conservative campaigners gave me in basically in an exchange. So thank you, Joe, for confirming that. Labour, of course, Stephen Morgan. Liberal Democrats, Charles Murphy. Very own friend of the pod, Elliot Lee from the Green Party. Mark Zimmer, another friend of the pod. They've both contributed in a couple of episodes and taken part in local ward hustings with us. Mark Zimmer for Reform. And I've messed up typing in Jacob's. It's Jacob Lee Short, so it's Jacob Short. Sorry, Jacob. This is what happens when you try to rush on a Sunday afternoon.
Well, we should probably touch that Jacob Short is the Portsmouth Independent, stood in Fratton twice.
Yes.
Increased his went from 0 to 400 votes in the first year, and then increased his share this year. So I actually think, I mean, in terms of this one for our fascinating runners and riders, we're putting. I think we're both putting Stephen home and hosed. The question will be about the placings on this one, because there is an element of the Conservatives have not been active in Portsmouth South. 5 years ago when we started the podcast, all three E&C wards were bright blue. They were actively campaigning in Portsmouth South, and it's kind of just quietly gone to sleep. And Flick Drummond was the MP for Portsmouth South in 2015. So, that's kind of melted away. Mark has been active for reform. The Greens were, I think I want to say it's the first year, but they had a candidate in every ward this year. So it's going to be fascinating to see whether any of, shall we say, the further left from Labour head towards the Green as a Green vote. Will reform get any traction there? The Lib Dems always have a sort of solid but unspectacular vote in the South, despite the fact that, very similar to Gosport, they've got the majority of councillors in the South. It's a real melting pot, this one, and I find it difficult. I can make arguments for all the minor placings after Stephen, as to who might end up second, third, fourth, fifth, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly gone a bit of a journey, hasn't it? If looking back to 1997, it was Lib Dem. Then in 2001, Lib Dem. 2005 Lib Dem. 2010 Lib Dem. Then Conservative in 2015, which seemingly the people of Portsmouth South didn't seem to like very much. And that's when they went to they went for Stephen Morgan, who got in initially in 2017 with a comfortable but shallower majority, but then extended that lead actually in 2019. Will he extend that lead? Will he really continue? Will he continue to extend that lead as Labour come into power, as is statistically likely? Who knows? But I think let's be honest, the first place isn't really kind of in question here.
No.
The interesting thing in Portsmouth South is who's in second, third, or fourth, and will the Conservatives be fourth?
Yes, as I say, I can make a case for the Conservatives being fourth. I could possibly even make a case for them being fifth.
Okay.
Because there is an element of, if I look at, the fact that PIP have chosen to stand in the South, for me is it's a very interesting signal, because if we look at the success of PIP, it's all been in the North. It's all been at the expense of the Conservatives. Every council seat that they've taken has been replacing a Conservative. And whilst they've seen a little bit in Baffins and a bit more in Fratton this year, and they did reasonably well in Nelson, they're yet to unseat anybody in the South. And so I think Jacob is a very hard-working local campaigner, and I do wonder how much of this is, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, is the launch for their 2026 all-out elections in Portsmouth South. Is this the start of their signposting that or stakeboarding, if you will, that they intend to take Portsmouth South seriously, and they really want to make some noise down there?
Yeah, indeed, and that seems to be indicative of their ambitions, and it remains to be seen kind of how much that plays into, because let's be honest, of late, some of the parties have really struggled to actually find just one candidate in every ward. In 2026, they're going to have to find three. So I think some of them are going to find that really, really difficult unless there's a phoenix rising from the flames of the number of campaigners that there are in the local Conservative Party, unless the local Labour Party kind of finish arguing with themselves, then they'll will those parties struggle? Who knows? It's remains to be seen. Tim just made a point of asking actually what impact is the student population for the University of Portsmouth having returned home for the general. I don't know what time is when's University of Portsmouth breaking up.
I mean, it depends. If they're on finals, then I think people will have already gone by July the 4th. But I think if they're not, then it will probably. I think they'll probably still just be there. So yeah, I think it could have a bearing. I just can't see. I can't see a way that anything is going to make a difference. As I say, be interesting to see, how many votes Reform get. It'll be linked to how many activists they've got and how much they can get out and knock doors and campaign, and where they choose to target those campaigns. Because I think this one is fascinating in terms of the minor places.
21st of June, apparently the University of Portsmouth breaks up.
Bloody hell.
Okay, so last but by no means least, Portsmouth North. So Penny Mordaunt, first elected. Sorry.
Yes, this one is fascinating, isn't it?
Okay. So first elected in 2010, currently has a majority of 15,780. So that would have felt quite comfortable in times gone by, but these days that doesn't seem. And a lot of the polls recently cite the seat as falling to Labour's hands. Who kind of who knows at this point, but it doesn't seem to be kind of looking good, does it, on the swing from a swing perspective nationally at the minute?
Well, there's a number of interesting dynamics in Portsmouth North, and I guess the first is who's not standing.
Yes.
Which is that the Portsmouth Independence Party. I think had they have stood, I think it would have been this would have been as easy to call as the other ones. Which is I've always held this view that would have, Reform will have a nibble at Penny's vote. Pip would have taken huge chunks out of it and almost certainly split it, if not in half. Then, I estimate they would have taken, 25 to 30% of Penny's vote. And I think with the, with Labour riding high, I think Amanda would have kind of romped home. But I think there's a few different things in here. One is Penny has a very strong personal brand. I don't think the King's coronation hurt that at all. So I think, although, having a Conservative badge at the moment, it isn't helping you to get elected. I think, she's widely respected. I don't think we can gloss over what happened in Cosham for Amanda.
Yeah.
Because, I it's one of the ones I got wrong. I thought that, I thought Cosham would be, I thought Amanda would win Cosham, and she didn't. And I think that for me, how damaging that will be, I don't know. Because to the point of political activists, it's a question of, will the Labour Party send people and money to Portsmouth North to really push Amanda's campaign, or will they focus their efforts elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean I think that's the key thing. I think with a lot of things, to be honest, you need a candidate, you need a message, you need members, and you need money to be able to connect with the local electorate. And if you've not got enough people and you've not got enough money, then you won't get enough leaflets. And as much as we all talk about how much we hate leaflets, but they work, that's why political parties keep doing them. Then, yeah, I wonder whether it not being on Labour HQ's target list, perhaps, if it is or isn't, I don't know, because it's not something we would see.
No,
would be the thing that might actually save it. So Penny might still retain the seat, obviously with a much narrower majority. So
yes, I also think, there was some insight in George in his recorded, the video that he recorded was that, he'd been asked by Reform potentially to stand for them, which suggests to me that, if that's the case, Reform probably don't have the greatest, they're possibly not putting the most behind their named candidate. The Lib Dems never do very well in the north, so this for me looks like a straight 2-horse race, and it feels like it's Labour's national surge versus Penny's personal brand, and it will be down to the voters of Portsmouth to decide on July the 4th.
I think, and the interesting thing here is, although obviously George Madgwick not standing, so Portsmouth Independents not standing in Portsmouth North, and them and George saying that he was putting his support behind Penny because he really didn't want to see Amanda win, I think was his explanation. In the locals, they were about 37% of the vote in Portsmouth North and in the locals. But then there's a whole other percentage of the electorate that don't vote in the locals because the turnout is nearly double in the general as it is in the local. In fact, the turnout last time was 64% in the general, and in across the whole of Portsmouth North, the turnout was 28%. So there's a whole kind of unknown quantity.
Correct.
That you don't know how they're going to vote. But then again, they might also be a lot of the people that would have possibly been, that might be the Conservative voters that would in the current circumstances, be inclined to stay home.
Every possibility, but time has beaten us in terms of today's episode. We were going to cover all the stuff around getting photo ID and signing up for postal votes.
We just need to list the candidates in Portsmouth.
Oh, of course we do. No, go for it.
Conservative, Penny Mordaunt; Labour, Amanda Martin; Liberal Democrat, Simon Dodd; Green Party, Duncan Robinson; and for Reform UK, Mel Todd. But I'll share the links about making sure you have photo ID because you will need it for this year.
And 3 of the 5 there have been on the pod before. So Amanda joined us in 2019. Mel's joined us for an episode, and Duncan's been on a couple of times for the Greens. So we're not. Does that mean we've got 3 in each? I think it does. 6 friends of the pod. We'll take that.
Yeah,
well, they might not describe themselves as friends of the pod, but they've all been on. So good stuff. So we'll be back next week where we will be looking at the manifestos and probably playing a game of snog, adopt, avoid for the key policies from each of the parties. And we will be back. You've been listening to the Pompey Politics podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sainsbury. Do make sure to like, follow, subscribe so that you get your notification, and join us next week at 6:27. Let us know in the meantime what you think of the candidates so far, and don't forget to take part in that poll and let us know who you think is going to get your vote in Portsmouth or wherever you are. And yeah, let us know what you think of those manifestos as they come out. See you next week. Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube